Well, let's get to the politics of the upcoming by-election in Dunkley. This is an electorate in Melbourne, and if you live in Dunkley, well, you'll be heading back to the polls on Saturday, March the 2nd. This by-election will be a critical test for the major parties. Labor is trying to maintain support in the community. The Liberals are attempting to recover from last year's historic defeat at the Aston by-election. Joining me now is Redbridge Group Director Simon Welsh. Simon, great to see you. First of all, it seems like New Year, kind of same issues, not a lot of traction. Is that fair when we talk about the Labor government?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren, and good to be back. Thanks for having me. Look, I think if the government was looking for a bit of a reset over Christmas, that certainly hasn't come. I think we're looking at, as you rightly say, that the same issues, the same concerns. People would have experienced over Christmas a diminished Christmas because cost of living crisis, and those abilities would have really hit, capacity to pay for things would have really hit home. So I think January into February, ahead of this by-election in early March, is really shaping up as a fascinating time.
Yeah, in fact, last year, Simon, you said if they don't do something over the Christmas break and get some traction by February, that Labor is cooked. So what does that mean when it goes into the Dunkley by-election? I ask you in the context of, this stage 3 tax cut balloon that appears to have been floated over the last 24 hours. I mean, talk about the makeup of Dunkley. Are they going to enjoy a perhaps $5 a week cost of living relief?
Yeah, I think certainly going into the by-election, it was always going to be a referendum on cost of living and the government's response to that. No matter what they would have tried to have done, that's where it would have landed. They needed to take something big into this by-election on that cost of living front. Now, potentially, the stage 3 tax cuts could be that big thing, depending on where it lands and how they reframe it and these sorts of things. And I say potentially because, like all things in politics, there's opportunities and there's risks tangled up in the same issue. So certainly, yes, there is a real risk around the issue being framed and painted as a broken promise.
Okay, just on stage 3, I mean, you've done focus group after focus group. Do people care about so-called higher income earners getting tax relief, or do they just care about what they're getting? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, yeah. So that plays out in different ways. So certainly ironically, in some of the electorates where there's higher proportion of high income earners, you get those higher educated, more politically engaged folk. They're quite happy to vote on a values basis on an issue like this.
So fairness issue, for example.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with the audio. Sorry.
No, sorry. Forgive me. I mean, are they voting on fairness? What seems to be fair, or are they judging what is fair?
Yeah. So in a more politically engaged electorate, you will see sort of a values-based voting on fairness. In an electorate like Dunkley, things can be different. So Dunkley, one of the things that makes Dunkley quite challenging for Labor is its demographic profile. It tends to be sort of more home owners. It tends to be a bit older. It tends to be a bit less diverse than areas where Labor now does particularly well.
Okay.
It's also a part of Melbourne that behaves a bit more like Western Sydney and a bit more like the suburbs of Brisbane. It's just one of those funny quirks of geography. That part of Melbourne tends to be a bit more aspirational. A bit more emphasis on individual work ethic, individual reward, more so than sort of communitarian or collectivist thing that you often see associated with progressive Melbourne. So it's challenging. It's a challenging electorate in that sense. So this is where I think the stage 3 stuff is fascinating, and how this will play out over the next month. We'll be watching really keenly. Is we know also through all the focus groups that we do that people don't expect government to be able to wave a magic wand and fix the cost of living crisis. They understand it's complex. They tell us this all the time. What they really want a sense of is, are you at least on my side? Are you at least trying? And up to now, as we've talked about, that there seems to be at best a big question mark on that over this government, and sort of being seen as not particularly doing much for the types of voters that we find in a seat like Dunkley. So if the government can reframe these tax cuts and get the communication of that right, about it. We're rebalancing this towards middle to lower income Australians, to those aspirational Australians out there in those suburbs. That's a very good thing, and they can ride that into the by-election. It also then creates a risk for the opposition. If the opposition is then seen to be opposing those the reframing of these tax cuts, then whose side are they on? And if their pivot to the suburbs is really the core of their strategy for the next election, then that raises some really strategic problems for them about how they respond to a reframing of the stage 3 tax cuts. So I know there's lots of ifs and ands in what I've just said, but I think how things play out over the next month is going to be fascinating. And Dunkley will be a litmus test of how the government lands its cost of living reform package heading into this year. And if stage 3 is at the core of that, then it will be it'll be the perfect test of that, because it will play out in other key electorates very similarly to what we see in the Dunkley by-election.
Yeah, fascinating indeed. A bit of food for thought there for all caucus members going into that meeting tomorrow as well. Simon, great to see you as always. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Laura.